Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Tuba People TV. Puddles and I, well, Puddles is really enjoying his environs at the moment. I think this might be the most environmentally interesting setup for him in all of the Tuba People TV episodes, so have a good time. We are in Tucson, Arizona with Steve Gamble. Steve Gamble is the bass trombonist of the Tucson Symphony, and when I was in Chicago as a student, Steve was a member of the Chicago Chamber Brass, very excellent brass quintet, and did many engagements every year and made several albums and was very active. After that died down, you came to Tucson, but prior to that, you were at ASU in the mid-'70s. In 1977, I remember you telling me that you came to Chicago to study with Jay Friedman. And along the way, not attributed to Mr. Friedman, but along the way you developed some injury, some pain associated with playing, and eventually you found yourself at Mr. Jacobs' door. Is that fairly accurate?
Fairly accurate.
Okay.
Yeah, I was at music camp and overdid it the last summer I was there. Fried my upper lip.
Okay.
Spent several months trying to get back to where I could play at all.
What
People suggested I go see Mr. Jacobs.
Okay. But as I recall, you didn't necessarily go to him right away, and so do you recall if you were still suffering that painful when you saw him?
I don't.
But you described it to him, probably.
It was a very traumatic experience, so even if it wasn't actually hurting by then, it was still in my head.
Yeah. Well, what was that? What did you do in that first lesson?
Well, I went in and told him why I was there, although he may have already known from phone calls. And he took out his little pen light from his pocket and looked at my lip, and that's about all the attention he paid to the problem the whole time I studied with him. He went right into things that, after looking back, were designed to change my focus from things that don't matter, like whether your lips hurt, to things that matter, the music you're playing and the music you're trying to make, not the technical involvement of making the music. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I don't have a lot of detailed memory of my lessons with him, unfortunately, but I have a few highlights that are very vivid in my memory.
Well, it sounds like he got the pen light out, and he was probably looking for visible injury to see if there was actually an injury that he could detect.
Well, I did have a little depression right here. I still do, actually, and a little red mark that gets bigger with abuse and gets smaller when I take it easy. And
well, when you said that getting you to focus on the music, he didn't really pay much attention to your injury. What did he do in terms of? Do you remember what you did in terms of refocusing your attention away from your lip and onto the music?
I have one very vivid memory, simply because he wrote something on one of the pieces of music that I was playing for him, the Hindemith Sonata, first movement. He wanted me to change the way I was focusing on what I was doing, so he drew in these little circles and oblong things connecting one note to the next, and I still have that. It was a matter of change, not necessarily a problem with kind of with a wandering mind while I play, but just to get me to focus more in a way that I hadn't before. Changing my habits to, how habits, they don't really go away, they just get neglected, and you change to new habits, and the old habits don't manifest. So whatever I was doing, it wouldn't even matter what it was. What he was teaching me, it wouldn't matter what I was doing. It was all associated. By the time I went to see him, everything I did was associated with everything else I did. And you just got to break that. By pretty much anything you do will break it.
Just developing something new.
Just do something new. So we worked on focusing and, you know, on how I should be thinking when I'm playing, and we worked on, and that was with the business with, you know, connecting the notes one at a time in the Hindemith Sonata to get me to not pay too much attention to what just happened, to not think too far ahead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, really focus on what I'm doing, which isn't something that I guess I did before that. But with enough practice, you can overcome that lack of focus. And so that actually isn't the thing that I remember the most about it. It was the other things that he did that basically changed what I allowed myself to be influenced by. Mm-hmm. Were more, that's what I remember the most. How to rely on what you've done before that was good, or something that was good that you can associate with what you're trying to do. Some accomplishment that you've had. You know, my way of interpreting now is something that I, you know, things develop once you study with somebody, and if they've got you going in a certain direction, you add most of it yourself, and but you may never would have added it if it hadn't been for the person that influenced you. So it's like it's most of the people that I know somewhere along the way had to overcome negative thinking, you know, some way. Everything or the focus was on what they can't do, you know, the things that are burdening them as far as what they need to do to improve, and their focus is all on that stuff. And once they've accomplished something, then it seems to lose its importance. They don't have as much appreciation for what they can do as they should, because if they did, it helps them get better. And that's the kind of thing that I learned from the lessons that I had with Arnold Jacobs. And so it's like, at this point, it's like the focus is on what you can do, not on what you can't do. Mm-hmm. And it's very beneficial. It changes your attitude towards what you're doing, and it gives you something extremely obvious to concentrate on when the going gets rough. You know, some crashing and burning going on around you.
Sure.
You can focus on something very, very positive, something very concrete, stuff you can do. If you do what you can do, and don't worry about what's going wrong. Yeah, so it sounds overly dramatic, but it kind of feels like that sometimes.
Sure.
You know, and you will get through that, and you may contribute to other people getting through it too. Mm-hmm. And it's helped me a lot. It takes a lot of the pressure off when you play. Yeah. To concentrate on some things that you're good at. You know.
That sounds good.
And a lot of people don't even know what they're good at when you ask them. So it's a problem, I think. Anyway.
Steve, I remember when we were at lunch yesterday, we were talking about your lessons and your memories, and they are, you have some very specific memories. A few of them, and one of them had to do with, I think what Jacobs was doing was more or less training your brain. But at the time you were playing tenor trombone and you were working on Mahler's Third Symphony, and he did some physical manifestation of his that he was doing repetitively.
Right.
That helped you. Can you describe that? Do you remember?
Yeah. I'm working on the Mahler 3 solo, and it's all going fine because it's down in the register that I was the best at. I played that register a lot in brass quintet, and got to the part where all the trombones come in on this deep bum, and he didn't like the sound, and so just, you know, I wasn't really relaxed enough. I wasn't really releasing the air full and easy enough. And so whatever exercises we started working on, we kind of set the Mahler 3 solo aside for about maybe 10 minutes, as far as I can remember. And he was having me do things, breathing and buzzing the mouthpiece, trying to have some associations with something positive. He was every time I was supposed to be releasing the air the way he wanted me to, he would motion his arm, kind of, I think it was his right arm, but he would kind of uncurl from way up here, and it was like that. Okay. And so we're doing all these things, and we get finally back to playing the Mahler, and when it got to the D, he went like this, and I was just already trained in 10 minutes to just go. When he did that, it was playing a little trick on me, and the D came out massive, and I was just like, I'm getting goosebumps right now.
So you're thinking, is that me?
Yeah, exactly.
Who else is in the room?
And that wasn't the only time I left the studio there at the Fine Arts Building, thinking that. Was that me in there?
So once you did that period of 10 minutes of singing and mouthpiece playing and him doing this, then you went back to the Mahler, and you were working on the Mahler, but he didn't do this until you got to that D, which was which he viewed was a problem. Though.
Right, that's right.
Oh, and so he did that, and that just reminded you.
Yeah, it's my first experience with relying on the associations of positive things and playing, and so it took me a long time to be able to organize my practicing to do that on purpose, to find things that I could think that would be part of the picture, that were positive and beneficial, to purposely place in my imagination while I was playing, in order to aid that habit.
The development of the habit,
right.
the motor nerve musician development. Right. Yeah, I remember him saying, he would often say that, I'd walk into a lesson, he'd say, how good is your imagination today?
Yeah, sure.
And you had commented off camera just now about the imagination being very important. You'd said you can't really play anything that you can't imagine, or something to that effect.
Right, and I, for me, that's very true. It's like, you have to really see the results that you're after in order to be able to know if you did it right. It's like fairly obvious to me. I have a little phrase that I tell myself and I tell students and stuff, do what you can. I say it over and over again. And I tell myself that, do what you can. And people really that don't want to bother trying to understand what I mean by it say, ask me like, well, if all you do is do what you can, how do you get better? And that kind of thing. And I go, well, okay. I have very little patience after a while with that kind of thing. And I said, okay, you right now pick up your trombone and do what you can't. Go ahead.
Do what you can't.
Yeah, and they I don't know if they get what I mean by that either. So the whole point of your imagination is part of what you're doing as an artist. Any artist of any sort, any genre, is producing something so that people can witness what's going on in their head, so you have to have something going on in there, or you can't play. You can't be an artist if there isn't something going on in there that you're hoping other people will be able to understand or to perceive in some artistic way of their own, because you never really know what's going on in their head either. So it's important that you have the picture, and that you have something that I heard teachers tell me forever. You got to have a concept, kid. I never knew what they were talking about, but that's what Jacobs, the whole idea of the imagination, sometimes you use the words too often, and then it just becomes a thing people say. But it's really just art, and something that when you really understand what you're trying to do, it's a lot easier for you to do it. And you can tell if you're doing it, as I said. That's the thing. It's a lot of time people don't even know what they're doing. It might come out good, but they don't know it. Mm-hmm. And so you can't rely on that experience. And that's what the thing with the arm and the lessons with Jacobs was. That is basically what I got out of it mostly. The most important thing that I got out of the lessons with him was that your experience is critical to your playing, to your art making, to your improvement, and you should rely on it, and you need to witness it as it happens, and you need to choose from it what you liked as an artist, and if that's how you construct your pictures based on your own experience. You can do it because you've done it before. That's why it's in your head. It's a clear picture. It's really easy to charge ahead because you know exactly what's coming, and it's like there's not as much guessing and wondering.
Well, he would often say poor sounds can be made into good sounds, but silence cannot. And so I think that really speaks to your idea about do what you can, because you do what you can and you make what you can better.
Exactly.
Rather than
it's easier
trying to focus on what you can't do.
Right. Well, you can't focus on what you can't do. That's the thing, is that doing what you can is the only thing it's the only part of your endeavor that fits clearly into a picture that you can construct, because it's your experience. And so even if you have a problem, like like yesterday, those guys were working on the ba 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 ba, and they were having trouble with the triplet. There's millions of ways to work on that triplet that involve little parts of it that you can do, and that's what you should do. That's all you need to do.
Yeah.
Keep working on that until it becomes more part of what you do as a player, and then you add on to that.
Exactly.
And instead of trying to get it all at once and struggle and play it wrong a million times, I had a friend who was a trumpet player who had a friend, who used to say funny stuff, and so this guy used to repeat it all the time, and he said, "Yeah, this guy," he says, I never practice because I might practice wrong." He's kind of right. It's everything about playing is like that. It's you shouldn't even approach your instrument case until you're ready. It's like, the latches start coming open, and now your brain has to be prepared for everything that happens after that. And it's like part of your warm-up. Like, if you're not ready to do it, when you get your horn up, you're just making it harder for yourself later. So it's like very serious, actually. And then you have to be ready to be an artist right from the first second. You can't go, well, in 20 minutes after I'm warmed up, then I'll be an artist.
Well, I think that's exactly true, and that's, in a nutshell, what Mr. Jacobs would have certainly told me. And the brain works on percentages, and he likened it to a file cabinet with drawers. Every time you pick up the horn and you play a note, you should really you want to have excellence in mind, and so then you're adding another little repetition card into that file cabinet drawer of excellence, rather than adding multiple repetitions of mediocrity in that same note file cabinet drawer. And so it's really the brain works on percentages, and so what you do the most of, play mediocre notes or play excellent notes, is what's going to drive your bus.
Yeah. So when I've talked about playing the best thing and the second best thing, that's what you're doing. You're guaranteeing that you're putting way more into that good file, and it's.
I mean, he would actually say, I'm sorry to interrupt. He would actually say it's actually better for you to put the horn away after 15 minutes if that's all you can.
Absolutely.
With intentionality, focus on, rather than spend the next 45 minutes after that with wandering thoughts.
Absolutely.
Because all you're doing for those 45 minutes is reinforcing mediocrity.
Right. You know, something that I pointed out to a lot of people along the way, and they were paying me to do it.
Felt good.
Fools that they are.
Yeah.
Is that okay? We've been through this thing 15 times, and you finally got it, and now you're happy. You should be afraid.
Yeah,
Because you just played it 14 times the way you don't want to play it.
Yep.
How do you think you're going to play it the next time you try?
Yeah.
Like the 14 times or like the one time?
Yeah.
And now you're going to have to play it another 127 times to be able to Don't do it that way. Take it easy. Go at your pace, whatever it happens to be, whatever you can do. That sounds great. If it's not fast enough, play it in a different key. If the key that it's written in isn't your key, learn the music, become an absolute expert at some little thing about
Sure.
it before you move on, so that that's probably the way that you're going to do it when you have to. And
I mean, I think a Jacobs-ism for that would be, don't play by rules, play by results.
sure, Right.
If you have to change the rules
absolutely, keep changing them.
to play with excellence, always your search is for excellence, not for playing correctly.
Right. I started talking about something like that yesterday at lunch too. There was we were talking about getting old and how do you keep up.
Yeah.
Maybe I was the only one that was talking about that.
I'm not far behind you.
But it's like if you do this every day, every little change that happens to your body just keeps up on its own. You don't have to wait until this particular forced way of doing everything finally turns to garbage, and now you have to reinvent everything all of a sudden, and you can't play anymore.
Well, this is true. Yeah.
Right, and I have the thing with my chops back in whatever that was, 78, when I fried those things at camp. My embouchure is the center of where I put my mouthpiece used to be kind of in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not there anymore. It's way over here because that's kind of the way things went.
Sure.
Over the years, that little spot gets weak, and you move them around.
Just adjust it.
It's
Yeah. It's as Jake would say, it's just meat.
It's just, and it was real natural to do it. When I noticed that I was doing it, I kind of freaked out a little bit.
Sure.
And but it was easy to calm down because I go, hey, this is working. I guess it's wrong tracks you can get on if you're not really, really, really paying attention. But it's, as I've said, if you stick to the doing what you can predominantly in the real world, you really can't always do that. But if you can organize your practicing and performing so that you are mostly doing what you can, you don't get off on the wrong track. That's the thing. But you can get off on the wrong track, I suppose, and wind up at a dead end and have to undo everything. But that hasn't really been my experience, and I don't think that. I think that letting things go organically and letting yourself do whatever works, trusting that as long as you really have the completest picture possible of what you're trying to achieve, and it's coming out that way, that you're probably going to be fine doing this the way the teacher said you shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
I remember him talking about, in the subject of breathing in particular, he was very adamant that as a youngster, you learn these habits of good respiration, especially if you're playing a high flow rate instrument, but even so, not necessarily just for tubas and bass trombones and flutes. But if you learn it when you're young and you establish these habits when you're young, you'll grow old gracefully in the profession.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you won't, once you reach the changes that occur in your 40s, mid-40s, with things changing in your vital capacity, respiration, you won't have those issues. And,
Right.
I think he was right on that.
Yeah, it's amazing how long people who do it right can play, you know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. You know, Steve, yesterday at lunch, I remember you talking about how a lot of the stuff that Jacobs told you in those 4 lessons really came alive later. And I can certainly attest to that, having a very similar experience. A lot of stuff that he would tell me in the lesson, I would nod my head like a good student, and I'd be thinking, what does that mean? What does that mean? And then later, either he would say the same thing but differently, or somebody else would say something similar that just unlocked
Right.
this flood of memories. And oh, that's what he meant. And you're immediately taken back to 2 years or 3 years or a month or 5 years ago in that moment, and it's just like you were just there, and it just like explodes. And you had something similar.
Yes, right. I must say that there was mostly I didn't understand what Arnold Jacobs was telling me in the lessons themselves. I did have some very fine experiences, you know, with results that were, you know, that made me very enthusiastic about how things were going with my development as a player. But I didn't understand it so that I could put it to use myself, you know, and that's everybody, you know, good students are really teach themselves in the long run.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's what Jacob said. I'm teaching you so you can teach yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
But there was
So
something
it's-
about imitation, though, right? Imitation.
Yes, so it's like, so I was with Charlie Vernon, and I was playing a Rochu etude, and he was trying to get me to phrase something in a few notes in a measure, you know, something that some nitpicky thing that he wanted me to do a certain way that I wasn't picking up on it, and he was getting a little bit agitated, which, you know, he usually isn't very agitated, so it was noticeable.
Pretty relaxed.
And he was getting frustrated with my not being able to understand what he wanted, and so he finally just kind of raised his voice a smidgen and picked up his horn and said, "Shoot, man, just play it like this." And he plays the passage, and it was beautiful. And I had this thing where I realized something that I hadn't understood before, that it was simple. I really only needed to do it like something. Everything that I needed to do was only just needed to be like something. Mm-hmm. You know, mostly it's what you're thinking in your head. Mm-hmm. And it was like, okay, and then I played the passage and it was good, which isn't the story here. It was like, okay, things started to make a lot more sense right away, and I started having flashbacks of Arnold Jacobs lessons, and it was, that's when I started to understand a lot more about what I had experienced with Arnold Jacobs. And that's the thing. The whole thing about it is the experience, and it's the imitation of quality that you've produced before. It's the imitation of other people around you who you admire. It's a lot less complicated. It's more responding as a whole person to your environment than it is calculating everything, and it's so much easier that way.
Not getting under the hood when you're trying to create.
Yeah,
not asking questions when you're trying to make statements.
Absolutely, it makes you want to get your horn out and practice, and it's not such a intimidating burden when you're not calculating every little move anymore. And you know, I used to do that. That's how I learned how to play. I think that's how everybody learns how to play. You know,
mostly
concert F in, you know, 4th grade or whatever it is. Put your lips like this and hold your horn like that, And you get started off on the wrong foot the first day. Most everybody, when you listen to their experience, they were taught by the numbers and not about what an F sounds like.
Right.
And then they do it that way forever and ever, and it works fine for a long time because you don't really have to do much to beginning band, and the trombone part is like F and C or whatever. And and it's ingrained to keep on adding on to the information that you need to play well.
The technical aspects.
Programming the machine to produce more and more great things. And so in my experience, as crazy as it sounds, the more I knew, the harder it got. And
more complicated to keep all the pieces of machinery going.
I just wasn't smart enough. Now, I met a few guys along the way that were smart enough to do that, and they would say that this is what they do, and they were great. And I go, well, you can't really be doing that. But they were real smart, and real smart. It's like their little computer brain was just like on fire, and they could keep it all organized. And I go, well, okay. But I think mostly people can't do that, and it's a lot easier to imitate. And so when I learned that, it made it my experience of what I'm describing here is like every time I sat down with a bunch of players that were better than me, I always played better.
Because you're just imitating what you.
I'm just doing what's going on.
Yeah.
And I mean, and if I was the best player in the group, I couldn't. I was stymied, kind of. Maybe that's a flaw in my whole approach to not be able to put that out of my mind and go with a total picture in my head and just blinders on, play. But I have a lot better time knowing that what I'm doing enhances what other people are doing. It's kind of what I learned in the quintet, and it's where I'm most comfortable. And so when I'm sitting in with a bunch of people that can really play, I play better.
Well, Jacob said that the one of the finest ways of learning is through imitation. It's the quickest way because you put an action thought right in your mind rather than a question thought.
It's all right there too.
Yeah.
It's like, and I played with some really great players in the quintet, and I didn't, they might have had all kinds of crazy stuff going on in their head while they were playing, but I didn't know it. Yeah. I could only hear what was coming out, and all I had to do was do that.
Yeah.
And I really learned a lot from that. Everything about being a collaborator, of playing in tune and playing in time, and matching pitches and matching articulations and matching dynamics and matching tone colors and
just imitate.
It was all right there, and it wasn't that hard to do it.
Yep.
Once I finally once that thing with Charlie happened, and I started remembering Arnold Jacobs' lessons, and it was way simpler than I'd ever done up to that point.
So it all came into focus there.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, as usual, Puddles has reminded me to bring a token of our appreciation for you taking time out of your busy day.
You brought it to the desert. That's a good thing.
And it's the new charcoal gray variety.
All right. I heard about that.
Yeah. So we give you our thanks.
All right.
For taking the time.
I've been looking forward to meeting you too, buddy.
He says he's been looking forward to meeting you and to thank you. And he'll never wash his wing again.
All right.
Since you've just shaken it.
Okay. Well, I can tell that he hasn't washed it in a while.
Now you're telling secrets. And now back to you.